Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going to unpack the absolutely mind-blowing engineering and, frankly, the staggering scale behind modern maritime trade. So let's jump right in. Right now, literally as you are watching this, there are an astonishing 38,000 cargo vessels in transit across the globe. I mean, just imagine the sheer level of coordination that takes for a second. And you know what's really wild? That massive fleet is single-handedly carrying 90% of all international trade. We're talking everything from the tiny microchip in your phone to heavy industrial machinery. The vast majority of our global economy relies entirely on these incredible feats of engineering. To truly grasp how this all works, here is our voyage map for today's explainer. We'll cover global shipping's massive scale, the limits of physical expansion, the block construction method, engineering the LNG engine, sea trials and delivery, and finally, the future of shipbuilding. All right, Section 1, Global Shipping's Massive Scale. Let's start by zooming in on the jaw-dropping size of a modern $200 million megaship. Look at these numbers. These vessels are absolute behemoths. They're 400 meters long, so picture 4 football fields laid end to end. They weigh as much as 7 Eiffel Towers or roughly 11,500 African elephants. And actually, that's just the empty weight, hitting 70,000 tons before the cargo is even loaded. As for capacity, over 23,000 containers. If you took those containers and lined them up, they'd stretch 150 kilometers. We are literally talking about floating cities of steel. Moving right along to Section 2, Limits of Physical Expansion. Because despite all that massive size we just talked about, human engineering has hit a physical roadblock out there on the water. Engineers can't really expand the footprint of these ships anymore. They've hit what we call the canal ceiling. They simply won't fit through the Suez or Panama canals if they get any wider or longer. So this hard limit is forcing a complete internal redesign of how these giants operate. To bypass this limit, the solution had to come from the inside. They're shifting away from traditional heavy diesel fuel over to liquefied natural gas, or LNG. Since they can't scale the steel up, they are focusing on supercharging environmental efficiency from the inside out. This transition to LNG results in a massive 99% reduction in sulfur dioxide and a 20% drop in overall carbon dioxide emissions. It's a huge win for cleaner oceans. Which brings us to Section 3, the block construction method. You might be wondering, how do 6,000 shipyard workers actually build 9 of these beasts in just 2 years? Well, they use the whole block construction method. Instead of building the ship from the bottom up in one single spot, the ship is built in massive independent chunks that are already pre-outfitted. These separate modules are built and then hoisted together by giant cranes. It basically turns the shipyard into the world's most extreme Lego set. Let's look at how this actually comes together. It starts with industrial lasers burning at 18,000 degrees Celsius. Just for context, that is 3 times hotter than the surface of the sun. They slice through 880 kilometers of steel like a knife through warm butter. These sheets become blocks, which are pre-fitted with wiring and pipes, and then lifted onto the main hull. Finally, human hands fuse the whole thing together with 1,250 kilometers of continuous manual welding. If you laid that weld out in a straight line, it would stretch all the way from Karachi to Lahore. Insane, right? But here's the absolute kicker: the tension between massive scale and microscopic precision. A single millimeter mistake in alignment between these huge blocks can completely ruin the structural integrity of the hull against merciless ocean waves. There is absolutely no room for error. All right, Section 4, Engineering the LNG engine. Let's dive a bit deeper into the true heart of this vessel, the revolutionary propulsion and storage system. Using LNG introduces a pretty intense thermal challenge. To keep roughly 20 million liters of fuel in a liquid state so it doesn't expand into a dangerous gas, engineers effectively built a cryogenic thermos the size of 6 Olympic swimming pools right inside the ship. It stores LNG at a freezing minus 161 degrees Celsius. It's lined with this super thin 1.2 millimeter corrugated aerospace-grade steel membrane that can flex and shrink under the cold without snapping. And to make sure it's perfectly airtight, they use a surprisingly old-school soap and vacuum dome test to hunt for tiny microscopic bubbles. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones. This sub-zero fuel then powers a 2,000-ton engine that is so huge workers can literally walk inside it. This six-story behemoth produces 85,000 horsepower, driving a 220-ton central crankshaft, and that force spins a 92-ton propeller, standing 10 meters tall. To prevent catastrophic vibrations at those high RPMs, engineers use what's called a blue dye contact test. They coat the shaft in bright blue dye and check the wear patterns upon removal to guarantee millimeter-exact alignment. Next up, Section 5, Sea Trials and Delivery. Once the steel is fused and the engine is set, the ship has to actually prove it can survive the ocean. Before setting sail, the hull is coated with an astonishing 1 million liters of specialized friction-reducing paint that covers an area double the size of Vatican City, all just to lower fuel consumption. Up top, the command bridge comes alive with a 360-degree digital smart eye system. Then, the crew embarks on 15 grueling days of sea trials. They push every single system to its absolute limit, testing maximum speeds, slamming on the emergency brakes, and dropping an anchor chain so huge that the total chain weighs as much as 60 African elephants. Once it survives all of that, it is officially cleared for global commercial service. Finally, Section 6, the future of shipbuilding. Let's zoom back out to see where this massive 1.2 billion worker maritime industry is heading as we enter 2026. When we look at global output, the market is incredibly concentrated. China is currently dominating, holding nearly half of the entire global shipbuilding market at 46%. They are followed closely by South Korea at 28% and Japan at 15%. But the industry is definitely facing some rough waters. With a 15% skilled labor shortage threatening global output, shipyards are rapidly adopting automation to stay ahead of the curve and meet those strict environmental regulations. Today, 75% of shipyards are using Internet of Things sensors for asset tracking, and 65% are utilizing AI for predictive maintenance. And as a real testament to the shift we discussed earlier, an impressive 40% of all new container ships being launched right now possess LNG capabilities. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for today's explainer. As we slowly replace traditional heavy steel brawn with artificial intelligence, highly advanced robotics, and greener energy, what impossible engineering feat will humanity conquer next on the open oceans? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep your eyes on the horizon.